In many cities and towns in Ontario, it takes a cold weather alert to open warming centres for those without adequate housing or shelter. Justin Chandler covers Hamilton-Niagara for Ontario Hubs. He's been looking into how well that works and joins us now from Hamilton. Hello, Justin.
Hey, Jan.
All right, so why are warming centres needed in the first place?
Well, warming centers are needed in the first place because a lot of municipalities don't have the necessary social supports to keep everybody housed at one time. And so when it gets really cold, for example, in Hamilton, where there are about 500 shelter spaces and about 1,500 people who are unhoused at any time, there's a mismatch. So people don't have enough beds to stay in. The shelter system is often at about 100% capacity. So warming centers are opened up so that people can get some reprieve from the cold without necessarily bed to sleep, just to essentially prevent people from freezing to death outside.
All right, I'm going to speak for myself and say whenever I get a cold weather alert or something on my phone, I simply look at it and it really means nothing. Just means, wear a hat, wear a jacket. But weather alerts do trigger the opening and closing of warming centers. How does that actually work?
Yes, and I'll just add the caveat that it does depend on the municipality or the jurisdiction that we're talking about. But here in Hamilton, for example, this is starting to change. But the procedure has been that when it hits -15, the medical officer of health issues a cold weather alert, and that triggers the opening of warming centers, which are partially community centers, select libraries. These open and allow people to come in to warm up. And then it also means that overnight warming centers are activated. And there's currently one of those in Hamilton, and it was recently changed so that it'll actually be open every night, regardless of the temperature. But in Toronto, it's still the case, like in Hamilton, with that -15 threshold, that this has to be activated in order for it to open.
I think we all agree -15 is incredibly cold. And I want to talk about one of the scientists you spoke to, Public Health Ontario scientist, Hong Chen, gave you some troubling statistics on the relationship between death and cold temperatures. What did he exactly say?
Yeah, this is based off of a Public Health Ontario report that some scientists led. And they found that for each 5-degree drop in the daily average temperature in Ontario, this is based off of coroner's reports over the years, there was a 3% increase in non-accidental deaths persisting over a week. So basically 7 deaths a day for every 5-degree drop in average temperature. So that doesn't mean 5-degree drop to like -15 to -20. It just means the temperature goes down and deaths increase.
Now, in your article, you sort of looked at the research and sort of, there have been arguments about whether or not these thresholds actually are based on anything. And your research suggests that common thresholds aren't based on science. What happens to the body when it's fighting off cold temperatures?
Yes, Dr. Chen told me that really cold weather has some pretty serious effects on your cardiovascular system. So that's one of the reasons that cold weather effects last so long, is that it creates this strain on people's hearts, and that can lead to heart attacks and strokes later on. And then, of course, there's the general cold weather risk of frostbite and hypothermia for people who are out in the cold for prolonged periods of time. But the reason that this might not be exactly linked to cold weather alerts necessarily is if you look at, for example, some research that came out of the MAP Center for Urban Health in Toronto, they found that 72% of hypothermia cases in unhoused people, this was again in a review of emergency department admissions and deaths, occurred at above -15. So Toronto has this -15 negative cold threshold, and that's actually not when the majority of people are starting to face these negative effects. A lot of those are happening before it ever gets that cold.
All right, you had mentioned that different municipalities have sort of different thresholds. Are temperature thresholds different in northern parts of this province compared to the south?
Yes, and that's for a couple reasons. So partially is like I said, every jurisdiction has its own plan. Toronto and Hamilton both use that -15 threshold. And again, I'll note that Hamilton's might be in the process of changing soon. But other municipalities use entirely different thresholds based on their own resources as well. And then we also have Environment Canada cold thresholds. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing, but effectively Environment Canada issues warnings. And this is probably what you get on your phone for the most part when temperatures are extremely cold. And these do change depending on where you are in the province. And a warning preparedness meteorologist at Environment Canada told me that this is because in some parts of, for example, Northern Ontario, people are a little bit more used to the cold. The threshold there is minus 40 for that sort of alert. And in South Central Ontario, it's minus 30. So those are based, though, more around when extreme cold is a hazard. Whereas these municipal alerts and the things that connect to warming centers, there's the health component, but there's also the resource component and sort of the political component as to when exactly this threshold is going to be activated.
I want to ask a follow-up on that in terms of the resourcing and sort of that argument with this threshold. There's a lot of conversation about why are we waiting until minus 15, when minus 10 is just as cold, and your data supports that. Can you give us an example? I believe in the city of Hamilton, there's been some progress. Andrew Horvath, the mayor there, made some changes to the warming centers, at least for this winter. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, there was an incident over the holidays. It was quite well publicized in the city where on Christmas Eve, actually, during a big snowstorm, a cold alert was ended because it was above minus 15. And what that meant was that an overnight warming center in the city's only overnight warming center, was no longer going to be funded. And so the person who directs the center, it's called the Hub, and Jennifer Bonner, who's the director there, posted about this online, and that brought a lot of attention and donations so that the center was eventually able to open. And the city ended up saying, a lot of people are calling this a policy failure. That's the words one councillor used. And we need to change things so that if it's still really cold, minus 10, minus 15, still high risk for people to get hypothermia, that we're going to have more space for people to go. So things changed in Hamilton. Now there's going to be warming centers open every night at the Hub for the rest of the winter. And the staff are currently looking at trying to get more warming centers open. And then there's discussion about whether this will continue after this so that there's more of a winter response rather than an alert-based response.
All right, one person you spoke to called this situation a Band-Aid on top of a Band-Aid. Ultimately, this is really a conversation about attainable housing or affordable housing. What are some of the solutions being considered?
Yeah, well, it starts with affordable housing, and that quote was from Dr. Stephen Huang, who's with the MAP Center, who did that research regarding hypothermia that I mentioned before. And that's his quote, because he said that really what we need is affordable housing. We do not have enough affordable housing, so we put forth emergency shelters. That's a Band-Aid. And then we don't have enough emergency shelters. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there's not enough for all the unhoused people in a lot of cities. And so warming centers are a Band-Aid on top of that. So what he said we need to do, number one, is create more housing. But in the meantime, come up with more warming spaces and more shelter spaces. So essentially create more of those Band-Aids until we can fix the injury.
Justin, great stuff. Thank you for your reporting.
You take care.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.